Alright, so like I said, this is going to be just about adding more detail to low poly scenes. Um, so here's where it's at currently. This is not a finished product by any means, but if we just compare this to version 2, okay, you can see this is a much simpler thing. So starting to add detail as a way to flesh out the scene, tell a bit of story, and make it a little bit more visually interesting to look at. So I'll kind of talk through first what I did, and then go through some very brief how-tos. The first thing that I want to talk about is going to come into play next week when we start talking about materials and lighting. And that is, I added some objects that will be emitting light next week. So I have these searchlights that I made that are going to be shining up on the rocket. And they're pretty simple. A little base and then the light itself, and it's rotated, pointing up the rocket. Just a quick demo of how I made this. I'm going to add a cube, go into edit mode and edges, and I'm just going to select these 4 edges. Okay, and I'm going to bevel them. So Control B, and I just beveled them a little bit, and that's how I got the general shape. And I selected the end face, inset that a little bit, and extrude it. And then on the other side, inset that a little less, and then extrude it in. And that's how I made that shape. So it took, like you saw, all of 30 seconds. I also did some work on the rover. So I inset these front panels here, inset and extruded, similar sort of way, and those are going to be some headlights. I might add some additional lights over the top. And then I might do something for lighting in here, just as ways that I can bring in additional light besides the sun lamp that's going to be illuminating this scene. Again, just give it a little bit more contrast, a little bit more dynamic presentation. The next thing that I will talk about are these domes. So you can see I have this, what appears to be kind of a complicated setup, but really wasn't. I'll talk next week about the materials. I just added the secondary material. I guess I'll show you real quick. I added a secondary material just so I could see inside, because I do want to model things inside. And it's just a simple glass material where I just turn down the alpha. That's really it. But if we go inside these, I gave this a floor. Okay. And then I also gave this a floor, and it's just a circle that I filled in and then inset in the ground. This is going to be dirt. That's why it's called habitat dirt. But it gave a place for these plants to live. So I guess real quick I'll talk about how I made those domes. So I'm going to jump back to the older version. Yes, we'll save. Okay. So this is what I started with. And for this main dome, let's go into front view, and I'm going to select all the faces. Okay. And then I'm going to hit C to bring up my circle select, and middle click and drag to deselect, because I only want these faces. Got this one underneath I don't want either. I don't want that one. I think I got everything else though. Although actually this doorway, let me hide the rover, get it out of the way. We'll deselect that. So once I have my selection, then I need to inset all the faces. So inset, and you see it gets a little weird. Oh, I also need to deselect that. Okay, so inset, and then if you look up at the top here, we've got a few additional options. Depth, outset boundary in individual. Individual is the one that I care about. So I'm going to hit I one more time, and there we go. Don't want to go too far or it gets really weird, but if you do it a little bit, it insets the faces individually, and then I can extrude them from there, extrude them in, and that's how I made my basically frames and windows. Then what I did is one of the reasons why I already applied the materials is so that I could save the selection. So in object mode, if I add a material, and again, I'll go into this more detail next week, I'm going to add a material and apply it to one thing. We'll make it red just so it's super obvious that I'm doing something. And then in object mode, you see I have all these faces still selected. So I'm going to add another material slot, give it a new material, and this is where I'll turn the alpha down so that you can see it a little bit. And I also need to, I believe, turn that down. Make that a little bit. And then the important thing is I need to say assign. There we go. So actually I didn't need to adjust these alphas. I just needed to assign the material. So now I can see through the dome. I did the same thing here with this sphere. The only difference is that before I inset all of these faces, go back to solid view. Before I inset all of the faces, right click and triangulate, and then I inset them, just to give some variation as to what it looked like. So that's how I made those. We'll go back to this and don't save that. Before I get to the plants and the rocks, I want to take a look at the rover. I did a similar thing on the rover, and then I also, because you can see inside of it, I gave it a floor and some very rudimentary seats and a little console. Nothing you're going to actually look at, but enough so that when you look through the windows, you can see that there is something in there. And then I gave it some basic stuff up top. Little satellite dish, some miscellaneous luggage. Nothing too fancy. It's really just cubes that you bevel the edges and scale them. Just the important thing is that I'm making sure as I'm building this that everything stays in a good hierarchy. It's named. Everything is parented to the core of the rover, and then I also gave that a parent so that I can rotate that and everything goes with it. Get a little bit more detail on the parenting setup here. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my rover collection, select all the objects, and then hit numberpad / to go into local view, just so nothing else is in the way. And if we look at our outliner, we can collapse the habitat, collapse the scatter, and just look at the rover. So here is the setup. I have the rover body is the parent. Oh, and it looks like I missed a thing. Just gonna call that rover parent, and that needs to be in the, oops. Move that to the rover collection. Okay, that's what it should have been. So I have all of my individual objects are parented to the rover body, and then the rover body is parented to this empty. And the reason I did that is because I can manipulate the empty, but I can also, if I hit Alt-R, that'll clear the rotation, then RX90, rotate that back. So now everything is kind of lined up again. Makes that a little easy. You can also go to Object and clear rotation to do that too. But it just makes it easier for me to move things around. So to parent them, you want to, in the viewport, you want to select, let me actually, we'll take the wheels And I'll unparent them, and we can go through that. Okay. That got kind of weird. Maybe I won't do it that way. I'll do it with new objects. That'll be maybe easier. Okay, so I got a cube, and then I'm going to have a bunch of little spheres. Okay. There. So I want to parent all these spheres to the cube. So I'm going to select all the spheres, hold down Shift, select the cube last. You want to select that last so that it has the orange highlight or the yellow highlight. That's how you know it's the active object. And then to parent them, you can either go to Object, Parent, and you've got a bunch of options here, or you can just hit Control P or Command P if you're on Mac. And you want to do Object, Keep Transform, and that'll keep them in their current position. If you don't do Keep Transform, I guess they're all at their starting position, so it's not really an issue. But let's say I moved this first and then did it. Oh no, I guess it's not going to. Sometimes they'll jump around on you. Not a problem I can currently replicate, but it happens. So I stick with Keep Transform, and things tend to work out. So once you have them parented, so Control P, Keep Transform, now everything will go with it. This is also really useful if, let's say, you have this cube, and then I also have an empty over here, and I'm using this empty as an array. So I'll select the cube, we'll give it an array modifier, and we want to set object offset to that empty I just added. Okay, so it's doing this little spiral thing. Which, if that's what I want, great, cool. The problem comes when I want to move this cube in this whole spiral. If I want to move it over here, you can see that it affects my array. And so you can individually select both the empty and the cube and then move it over, and it's fine, but that's kind of a pain in the butt. So instead, you can parent both of those to another empty. So I like to, for that sort of thing, I like to add a circle. And then in the empty options, I'm going to just bring the size up. And I'm also going to rotate it 90 degrees around the x-axis so it's laying flat. And it's also useful to name it. So we'll say array parent just for now. Now I can select the cube, my initial empty, and then our parent. Control P, Keep Transform. Actually, just, yeah, that worked too. So once they're parented, now if I want to move the whole thing over, I just have to select one object and everything stays with it. It's useful to make sure that this parent object is large enough so that it's easy to select, right? You don't want it to be so small that you can't see it. You can also, if you go to the object properties and visibility, or no, viewport display. I always get those two confused. But in viewport display, you can turn on in front. When I check that, no matter how I orbit my view, I'm always going to be able to see that empty. Okay, so that can be really useful if you have kind of a chaotic scene. No matter where you're looking, you can always get to it and move everything as you need. So another reason why, you know, keeping a good parent hierarchy is helpful for a organized scene. And then I also put it in collections so that if I want to hide, let me just delete all of these first. So I have all these collections so that I can hide individual elements easily without having to like, you can use the eye, but the eye doesn't stop it from rendering. So if you turn off the collection, that will stop it from rendering. So it's kind of a shortcut in that regard, but makes it easy to focus on individual components of my scene. All right, so I think the last in this kind of scatterbrained recording is just, incidentally, the scatter material that I've added. So first is some rocks, and all I did is I added a cube. So we'll add a cube here, and I'll go into local view. There we go. Oops, I didn't mean to add that in that object. I want to add it as its own object. Be careful there. Make sure you're in object mode when you add objects. All right, so I add a cube, and I right-click and subdivide it once just to get some additional geometry. And then it's just an issue of moving things around, making it look irregular, somewhat rock shape. You can turn on proportional editing. You can adjust the size and the scale. If you need to add more edge loops, you can. I also, just for some additional kind of style, triangulated the faces. All right, you can scale parts down. Just try to get an irregular look. Okay, maybe something like that. It's not a great rock, but you get the idea. So once I had that, then you make a couple of them, and I should make a few more. But you can kind of place them on your scene, rotate them around to give some variation so it doesn't look like you have the same two rocks all over your scene. Adjust the scales, and it just kind of helps give your landscape a little bit more interest.